David Johnson's life was as tense and fragile as the strings on his violin. He used to be the first violinist of a renowned symphony orchestra in New York, basking in the glory and achievements that music brought him. However, fate took an unexpected turn, and the orchestra disbanded due to financial difficulties, leaving David to face the harsh reality of unemployment. Every morning, David still got up at his usual time, habitually preparing to go to rehearsals. Emily, his wife, watched him with a look of exhaustion and loss in his eyes, her heart aching for him. Emily was pregnant, with the due date approaching rapidly. They needed more financial support to welcome their new baby. David knew he had to find a new job, but weeks of unsuccessful job hunting had left him feeling defeated. One chilly morning, David was walking down the streets of Manhattan, the cold wind biting at his face. He sat down at a coffee shop and ordered a hot coffee. As he was contemplating his future, his eyes inadvertently fell on a newspaper ad on the table. Funeral home assistant wanted, no experience necessary, training provided. David's initial reaction was hesitation and rejection. He had never considered having any connection with the funeral industry. However, with a baby on the way, he had to consider all possibilities. He decided to take a chance and apply for the position. The next day, David arrived at the funeral home mentioned in the ad. It was a traditional funeral home located in Brooklyn, with an old-fashioned and elegant exterior. David took a deep breath and pushed open the door. He was greeted by a kind-looking middle-aged man, Michael Smith, who was the chief mortician at the funeral home. Michael smiled and shook David's hand. "Welcome, David. I'm Michael. It's nice to meet you." David nodded nervously. "Thank you. I'm here about the job advertisement." Michael gave David a tour of the funeral home, explaining the various aspects of the job in detail, from receiving families to preparing ceremonies and finally to the embalming process. Every step required great patience and meticulousness. David saw some photos and memorabilia, sensing the unique solemnity and tranquility of the place. At the end of the interview, Michael asked, "David, why do you want this job?" David thought for a moment and then honestly replied, "I used to be a violinist, but now the orchestra has disbanded. I have a baby on the way, and I need a job to support my family. I know this job is entirely new to me, but I'm willing to learn and work hard." Michael nodded. "I understand your situation. In fact, what we need here are people with empathy and a sense of responsibility, like you. The work is tough, but it brings comfort and peace to others. If you're willing, we can start your training today." David felt a surge of unexpected joy. He hadn't anticipated being hired so quickly. He shook Michael's hand gratefully. "Thank you, Michael. I will work hard." Returning home, David shared the news with Emily. She smiled and hugged him. "David, no matter what job you do, I will support you. We'll welcome our baby together, and everything will be fine." That night, David lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The pain of losing the orchestra was still there, but the new responsibilities and mission gave him a renewed sense of purpose. With this hope, he embarked on a new journey. David's first day at work began at dawn. He arrived at the funeral home early, where Michael was already waiting for him at the door. After a brief greeting, Michael led David into the work area. The air was filled with a faint scent of disinfectant, and the clock on the wall ticked softly. "Today we need to prepare a funeral for an elderly gentleman, a retired veteran," Michael explained, handing David a clean uniform from the cabinet. "Change into this." David changed into his uniform and nervously followed Michael into the preparation room. The room was quiet and solemn, with the body covered in a white sheet lying on the central table. A sense of awe washed over David as he took a deep breath, trying to steady his emotions. "This job requires the utmost respect," Michael said gently. "We need to be at our best for every deceased person. They deserve this dignity." Michael began to demonstrate how to arrange the deceased's clothes, comb their hair, and perform each step with the utmost care. David watched Michael's techniques, gaining a newfound respect for this seemingly simple yet profoundly meaningful task. He attempted to mimic Michael's actions, his hands trembling slightly, but he executed each step with great care. As they worked, David couldn't help but ask, "Michael, how long have you been doing this job?" Michael smiled. "About 20 years. Each deceased person has a story, and every family's joys and sorrows are reflected here. We're not just workers, we're the final witnesses of a life." As time passed, David gradually adapted to the job. Although he felt uneasy each time he faced a deceased person, Michael's patient guidance and silent support helped him find a sense of calm. One evening, he shared his feelings with Emily. "Emily, today I prepared a funeral for a veteran. His family shared his story with me. He dedicated his life to the country," David said, a touch of reverence in his eyes. "I'm beginning to understand that this job isn't just about handling bodies. It's about respecting life." Emily gently held his hand. "David, I'm proud of you. You're not only helping those families, you're also setting an example for our child." A few weeks later, David faced a particularly challenging task, preparing a funeral for a young mother who had passed away due to illness, leaving behind a young daughter. David saw the little girl tightly clutching a photo of her mother, her eyes filled with endless sorrow. His heart was deeply moved. As he prepared the young mother's body, David's hand lightly brushed her cheek, as if saying goodbye. Michael stood nearby, silently observing David's every move. He knew that David was gradually finding his place in this work. After the ceremony, the little girl approached David and took his hand. "Thank you, sir. My mommy looks so beautiful." David's eyes filled with tears as he knelt down and said gently, "Your mommy is the most beautiful. She will always be in your heart." Through each funeral ceremony, David began to deeply understand the fragility and preciousness of life. He learned how to maintain composure and respect in the face of death, and in the constant work, he found inner peace and strength. Michael watched David's growth with a satisfied smile. As time went on, David gradually adapted to the work at the funeral home, his movements becoming increasingly skilled and natural. He began to grasp the profound meaning of his job in the subtleties of each task. Every time he arranged the appearance of the deceased, communicated with the family, or participated in a farewell ceremony, he found a kind of indescribable tranquility within himself. One morning, David was arranging flowers for a ceremony. The weak sunlight streamed through the window, bringing a touch of warmth to the room. Michael walked over and handed him a cup of coffee. "David, you're getting better and better. I can see you're truly committed to this work." David took the coffee, smiling gratefully. "Thank you, Michael. To be honest, this job has made me rethink a lot of things." Michael nodded and took a seat on a nearby chair. "I can see that. You're becoming more calm and focused, and that's a good thing." With each ceremony, David's inner turmoil gradually healed. The pain and confusion from losing the orchestra slowly faded with each farewell he helped facilitate. He realized that by providing a peaceful final journey for the deceased, he was also healing his own heart. At home in the evenings, David often shared his work experiences with Emily. She always listened patiently, offering encouragement and support. She saw the changes in David and felt deeply satisfied. Although her pregnancy made her physically cumbersome, she still did her best to care for David's emotional needs and daily life. One evening, Emily prepared a special dinner. The table was filled with dishes she had carefully prepared, and the candlelight softly illuminated the room. David walked into the kitchen, surprised by the setup. "Emily, is today a special occasion?" Emily smiled and shook her head. "It's not a special day. I just wanted to thank you. You've been working so hard lately, and I know it's not easy for you." David sat down at the table and took Emily's hand. "Emily, I should be the one thanking you. You've been supporting and encouraging me all along. I've come to realize that family is the most important thing." Emily gently stroked her belly. "Our baby is about to be born. I hope they can feel our love and happiness." That evening, David and Emily enjoyed a warm and beautiful time together. They talked about the future, planning the baby's name and the nursery's decoration. David felt a long-lost happiness, knowing that these changes came from rediscovering his inner peace. In his work, David became increasingly adept, not just as a mortician, but as a source of solace for the families he served. Once, he prepared a funeral for an elderly lady who had been a passionate lover of flowers. Her family wanted the ceremony to be decorated with flowers. David carefully arranged each bouquet, transforming the funeral home into a sea of blossoms. After the ceremony, the elderly lady's son came over and shook David's hand, tears in his eyes. "Thank you, David. You've given us a glimpse of what our mother loved most in life. She would be so pleased." David smiled and nodded. "It's the least I could do. I believe she'll feel your love in the afterlife." When David got home, He shared the story with Emily. She hugged him tenderly, saying, "David, you've done wonderfully. You're not only healing yourself, but also comforting those who have lost loved ones." David felt a warm glow, understanding that it was Emily's support and encouragement that had brought him this far. Their bond grew deeper as they awaited the arrival of their baby, looking forward to each new day together. One early morning, David received a special assignment. A young family had lost their son, just 17 years old. The news tightened David's chest with a painful knot. The thought of such a young life suddenly gone filled him with profound sorrow. He arrived at the funeral home and saw a grieving couple seated in the reception area. Sarah, the mother, looked pale and empty-eyed, while John, the father, tightly held her hand, tears brimming in his eyes. Michael softly introduced them. "David, this couple has lost their son Mike, who tragically died in a car accident." David approached and gently shook Sarah and John's hands. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I will do everything I can to help you through this difficult time." That day, David worked alongside Michael to prepare Mike. As David organized Mike's clothing, he couldn't help but think of his own father. His father had passed away from illness when David was young, and he hadn't fully understood the gravity of death back then, merely feeling the loss of an important person. Now, facing this young life, David felt a deep resonance. On the day of the farewell ceremony, the funeral home was filled with people. Mike's friends, teachers, and relatives had all come to say their goodbyes. Every face was marked with sorrow and reluctance. David saw Sarah and John standing by the casket, tightly holding each other's hands, tears streaming down their faces. He felt a pang of heartache, as if he were looking at his own childhood self with his mother. After the ceremony, David approached Sarah and John, speaking softly. "Mike may have left us, but his love and memory will always remain in your hearts. You need to stay strong. He would want to see you live happily." Sarah looked at David with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, David. Your words have brought us great comfort. We will always remember Mike. He will forever be our precious one." David felt a warm glow, knowing he had done something meaningful. When he got home, he shared the experience with Emily. Emily gently stroked his cheek. "David, you did a wonderful job. You're not just helping those families. You're healing yourself too." That night, as David lay in bed, his thoughts drifted back to his childhood. He remembered his father taking him to the park, teaching him to play the violin, and the final words his father had spoken. "David, no matter what difficulties you face, stay strong. You are my pride." Tears welled up in David's eyes. He had never truly confronted his father's passing. Now, through helping this family who had lost their son, he finally understood that death is not just an end for the individual, but also a part of the family's emotional journey. Though the departed are no longer present, their love and memories remain alive in their family's hearts. The next day, David decided to visit his mother. She lived in a small house in the suburbs, leading a simple and quiet life. Seeing her son's unexpected visit, she greeted him with a surprised smile. "David, I didn't expect you to come. Please, come in and sit." David walked into the house and noticed a family portrait hanging on the wall, taken when he was a child. In the photo, his father smiled at him, and his mother, filled with love. David sat beside his mother and took her hand. "Mom, I've been working at the funeral home recently, and it's made me think a lot about Dad." His mother gently patted his hand. "I know. Over the years, you've been avoiding Dad's passing. But in truth, Dad has always been watching over us, hoping we would be well." David nodded, a tear shimmering in his eyes. "Mom, I understand now. No matter where Dad is, his love will always be in our hearts." His mother smiled. "Yes, David, remember, though life has an end, love never does." That day, David spent a warm afternoon at his mother's house. They reminisced about his father, their conversation mingling with laughter and tears. David felt an unprecedented sense of ease and relief, knowing that he had finally confronted his father's death and re-examined his own inner self. Time flew by, and David had been working at the funeral home for more than half a year. He had not only become a skilled embalmer, but had also discovered his mission and value in this work. He had helped countless families through their grief and, in the process, healed himself. As his experience grew, David gained a modest reputation in the community. More and more people sought his services to arrange the final ceremonies for their loved ones. The funeral home became busier, But rather than feeling exhausted, David felt he bore a heavy yet sacred responsibility. On a sunny afternoon, David was busy at the funeral home when Michael came over and patted him on the shoulder. "David, I think you've reached a level where you can stand on your own. You're not only an excellent embalmer, but also a source of comfort for many families." David smiled and nodded. "Thank you, Michael. Your guidance and support have brought me to where I am today." Michael looked at him thoughtfully. "I have a suggestion. We could organize some death education in the community to help people face life and death more properly. It could benefit many people and make our work even more meaningful." David pondered for a moment and agreed. "That's a great idea. I'd be willing to participate and help more people understand and accept death." Thus, David and Michael organized a series of lectures and events at the community center. They invited doctors, psychologists, and religious leaders to participate, educating the public on how to confront death, handle grief, and find hope after losing a loved one. During one lecture, David stood in front of a full room of attendees. He began his talk with a smile. "Hello, everyone. I'm David Johnson, an embalmer. Today, I want to share some of my experiences and insights from my work." He recounted his story, from the pain of losing his orchestra to his initial experiences in the funeral industry and his journey of helping countless families through their grief. Each story was filled with warmth and emotion, resonating deeply with the audience. A middle-aged woman raised her hand and spoke. "David, thank you for sharing. I lost my mother and have struggled to move past the sorrow. Your words have helped me understand that my mother's love is always in my heart, and I should live my life well." David smiled and nodded. "Yes, love does not disappear with death. We must cherish the people around us and love them wholeheartedly." Through these activities, David felt an unprecedented sense of fulfillment and achievement. Not only had he helped many families through his work, but he had also spread positivity and hope throughout the community. He knew that this job had not only changed his life, but had also influenced the lives of many others. Meanwhile, Emily's due date was approaching. David made time each day to be with her, cook meals, and prepare for the arrival of their baby. Emily noticed the changes in David and knew that he had not only regained his inner peace, but had also become more responsible and resilient. One night, Emily's water broke, and David hurriedly took her to the hospital. In the delivery room, David held Emily's hand tightly, eagerly awaiting the arrival of their baby. After several hours of labor, Emily gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the doctor placed the baby in Emily's arms, David's eyes filled with tears. He gently touched the baby's small face, feeling an immense sense of happiness and contentment. "Emily, our son is absolutely beautiful." Emily looked at him with a smile. "Yes, David, we finally welcomed a new life. This is a whole new beginning." A few days later, David brought Emily and the baby home. They named the baby Michael, in honor of the Michael from the funeral home, who had always supported and guided David. David knew this was a new chapter, a beginning full of hope and love. Standing by the crib, watching the baby sleep, David felt a deep sense of gratitude and fulfillment. He understood that the end of life was not the end, but a new form of beginning. Through his work, he had not only rediscovered himself, but had also found the true meaning of life.